We're here. We are finally here to the parable of the 10 virgins. So the first thing that I want to point out is to remind you in the exposition that there was wars, rumors of wars. There was deception, serious deception. So the Lord talks about false prophets and false Christs, right? And then the Lord also says at the beginning of Matthew 24, he says, look, I got to tell you, serious deception is coming. And then a lot of people come to the Savior, right? Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the oil and the lamps. So I want you to notice that where the lamps are at. So the first place it shows up is it says, and notice I've got it arranged in a parallel structure. I haven't named each item. I just put A, B, C, D, E. So this would be A, and this over here would be A prime, and this would be B, and B prime, and C prime, and so forth. And I didn't put the B primes and the C primes over here because it would just clutter things up. And you can tell that I connected here to here. And the story reads down like this, and then you come back up over here and come down like that. If you were to read it in the scriptures, that's the way it looks. Right? It comes down, then you come back up to the parallel ones. Okay. So it starts out by saying they took their lamps. Now, remember that I mentioned that the Lord is super careful with his words, and that so many of these words have far deeper meaning than you realize. So why does it matter that they took their lamps? Why not just say the 10 virgins went forth, right? It says they took their lamps and went forth. So what do lamps give us, right? They give us light. They help us see things. And we see that later on. We see that same idea, right? Later on, we get towards midnight, and they trim their lamps, right? Over here. It says, so up above says, at midnight, there was a cry made, go ye out to meet the bridegroom. Or the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. It says, then all the virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. Now, since we don't use lamps anymore, not everyone knows what it means to trim a lamp. When you have a wick that's burning over time, it carbonizes, and the oil doesn't flow as well, and so the lamp doesn't burn as brightly. And so trimming a lamp, it means you pull the wick out a little bit and you cut off the burnt parts. And the reason for doing that is that the lamp burns more brightly when you do that. So here in this part, right, it's midnight, and all the virgins, they get up and they trim their lamps. Why? Well, because there's a massive deception going on. And what's the massive deception? Well, the evil servant is among them. And he thinks the Lord has delayed. Well, the Lord has delayed his coming. And when the Lord delays his coming, that's when he turns evil. Well, let's go back to this idea that when they started out, they took their lamps. Lamps are a way to see things. So I look at this and I think, because they had lamps, they were able to see, and they knew that it was time to go forth to meet the Lord. So these people, they don't have as much, the foolish virgins don't have as much oil in their lamps as the wise ones, but they have some oil in their lamps. And so they know, they know, hey, it's time. Time for what? The Lord's coming. It's time to go out and meet him. So this is where the parallel structure is going to help us. Look what I've highlighted right here. It says, and at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Look at the language I highlighted here. And they went forth to meet the bridegroom. This is Exodus language. Now, I don't have the time to really explain it here, but understanding Isaiah helps you understand that a great exodus is coming. A massive exodus. Jeremiah speaks of it. I don't think this is actually that Exodus, but this is Exodus language. They're going somewhere. When you go out to meet someone, that means geographical movement, right? When they went forth, this isn't symbolic language to me. This means a group of saints go somewhere. They move. They get up and go. And this is the crazy part. So this is, you've got all the 10 virgins. And let's talk about what the virgins are. Virgins are clean. They're pure, right? And they're betrothed to the Lord. These are members of the church. That's what that means to me. But it's not all members of the church. It's not everyone. Not everyone goes out on this initial exodus when they go forth to meet the bridegroom. Some of the saints do. And then it says, and this is the part that's hard for people to, it was hard for me to wrap my head around. Maybe it's easy for you. Of these people who are faithful members of the church, and now I get it, you may not be a member of my church, and so you're thinking of your church rather than mine. That's fine, right? But these are the Lord's people, and they go out to meet him. They have enough faith to leave on an exodus, to leave behind their belongings, and to go somewhere new as a group. And that's important in covenant theology to understand that if an entire group is righteous, you receive more blessings. But I'm not going to go into that again in the book. Hopefully I haven't said that too much. This is the part that's sad for me, like deeply and profoundly sad. So 5 or half of the people who go out on this exodus are foolish. And so they've left everything behind. They have enough faith to go out on an exodus. They're faithful members of the church. And yet they don't have enough oil in their lamps to overcome the deception that's coming. And what's the deception that's coming? The person who leads them out on this exodus becomes an evil servant. He's a servant to begin with. And he becomes evil. So this is like the Caiaphas story, right? It's like you're a member of the church, and I'm not suggesting that this is a particular leader or even the prophet, but this person has ecclesiastical and civil authority, and we've spoken about why, particularly because it's connected in parallel to governing and because he beats on other people. This person has authority, civil authority, and the reason that he has civil authority is because society is broken down because of the wars and the famines and the earthquakes that have already happened. And so now you're out on this exodus, and imagine the situation that you're in. This person has said, hey, it's time to go forth and meet the Lord, right? And all the faithful saints who have enough oil in their lamps, they're like, yeah. And they have enough faith and they have enough belief, and they go out on the exodus. And this really shouldn't surprise anyone. Think about the first exodus with Moses. It's not like the people went out there and it was like party time and everyone was happy and thrilled and having a good time. The people were mad, right? They didn't have water. They didn't have food. They were mad. They were mad at Moses after he had delivered them, right? This is crazy, right? But the reason it's sad to me is that they had enough faith to get that far, but they didn't have enough faith to recognize when the wise servant shows up. And so they get shut out of the bride chamber. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. Let's keep going. So the foolish, they didn't take oil with them. Now, I'm not sure what oil is. I believe it's somehow connected to information. But not just straight up information, not just straight up like I understand these parables or I understand the scriptures. No, that's part of it, right? Knowledge, just straight up knowledge, is part of that oil. But part of that oil is knowing the master's voice and having done the things that he has commanded us to do. By the way, when you go through and read the New Testament, it's not really all about do this church thing and this church thing and this church thing. It's more like go take care of the hungry, go take care of those without clothes, go take care of those people without housing, right? Go take care of other people. That's part of the oil too in my mind. Part of it's knowledge, right? Because if you understand this, right? Like if you read this and you're like, hey, this is right, and let's say it is right, then and let's say you're one of the virgins and you go out on the first Exodus, then when all this unfolds, your knowledge is like super important. It's super valuable. You're like, hey, I know what's coming, right? I have the answer key, right? But I guarantee you, most people are not going to believe what I'm saying here. They're going to think it's nuts. They're going to think it's crazy, right? And so they're going to get out there, and you've got a leader who has now effectively rescued you from war, right? Because there's wars going on, and God leads his people out. Well, they're God's people. They're going to be protected. And I suspect that they are protected. And so everyone's going to be like, man, this dude is awesome, right? This guy who let us out is awesome. Super awesome. It's like what the people said about Saul. They said, Saul has slain his thousands. The problem was David came after him, and they said, and David has slain his 10,000s. And that upset Saul to no end. But if you think that God won't, and I know sucker punch is the wrong word, but if you think that there isn't something that's going to be hard to not understand coming, then why did God deal with the Jews that way? I mean, go read Isaiah. Go talk to a Jew if you don't understand what I'm saying about there's all kinds of prophecies about someone coming and being a national deliverer. It's there. And the Jews were there like, where's our national deliverer? And along comes Jesus, right? And he overcomes sin and death. But he wasn't the national deliverer they were expecting. And that disconnect between what they were expecting and what actually happened blew their minds up, right? All these super religious Jews were like, well, this can't be right because it's not what I expect. And so they missed out on the Savior the first time. Well, guess what? You think that we just get to waltz into heaven, right? The second coming just comes. It just comes on an afternoon. Like, I'm a golfer, right? Like, I go play my 18 holes, and about 5 o'clock, Jesus comes. It's all cool, right? I've been good, and so I'm in the in group. No way. No way. There's no way that the Lord sifted the Jews the way he did, and he's not going to sift us. He will sift the righteous from the religious. And I'm not saying you can't be religious and righteous. That's not what I mean. You can, but there are people who have the outward show of religion, but inwardly, as the Savior said, they're like a sepulcher full of dead men's bones, right? And they go to church every Sunday, and they look, it's like the wheat and the tares, right? The wheat and the tares, they look the same. On the outside, it's the same. You can't tell wheat from a tare, right? The real difference between a wheat and a tare is what's on the inside, and you can't see that, right? And by the way, that's the part that the Lord cares about. When the Lord gathers the wheat, he doesn't gather the husk and the shaft, which is what the outward things that you can see. He gathers the fruit, right? The inward part of the man is what matters to the Lord. And that's what's going on here. So the wise, they took oil on their journey, right? And then it says, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. Well, I don't think they were taking a nap, right? Now, what does this mean? They slumbered and slept. I'm not sure, but my guess is it means that they were unaware of what was really going on, that they were asleep spiritually. And who knows how long the Lord tarries? Could be quite a while. Could be a year, could be 2 years, could be a while. So then we get to the second half, and it says, at midnight a cry comes, and it's like, go, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Wow. And then we talked about trimming their lamps, and the wise ones figure it out, right? They figure out that the Lord is really coming, and the foolish ones can't. And this is such a weird thought at this point. It's like they all hear that the Lord's coming, right? They all hear the cry. Why don't the foolish ones go out to meet him? And why are they go off to go get some oil? I mean, it's a very strange thing. That part of I will tell you, that part of this parable is the strangest part to me. That that they have to go, they go somewhere to buy oil for themselves. So there's a couple more things to say on this parable. The first thing is that, and I've mentioned this a couple times, and there's no real way to go through this here, but you would think that this wise servant is prophesied about, and he is extensively in the book of Isaiah. He is the national deliverer who is promised. And the Jews look forward to this national deliverer. They just think that he is the Messiah. He is a Messiah, meaning he is anointed, but he is not the Messiah. But he is the one who comes and fulfills all the national deliverance stories that are in the book of Isaiah. Oh, shoot, there was something I was going to say. I remembered it. The other thing to realize about this parable is that it is not the world at large that is being discussed here. This parable of the 10 virgins is about his church. It is not about the world at large. That's what the parable of the talents is about. So what happens in the parable of the 10 virgins is, let me just turn to something here quickly. First, there is a literal gathering of the saints, and they go out on an exodus. And it's either preceded by, or it happens just prior to wars happening. My guess is it actually happens just prior to the wars happening. And so the saints are delivered from all of the terrible destruction that comes because of the wars that are spoken of in the very beginning of Matthew 24. That's partly why they revere the evil servant so deeply, because he saves them from those wars. So then they go out and they're awake at the beginning, and then they sleep. And the reason for the sleep, this part down here where they slumbered and slept, they start out, they're awake here, then they sleep. It's because they think they've overcome. They think they've got the prize in the bag, that they've escaped the wars, they're led by a prophet, Jesus is coming, the party's about to start, and what they don't realize is that another exodus is coming, led forth by the wise servant, and it's midnight at this point, meaning the deception is terrible and hard to see through. And that's why they're trimming the lamps, because they need all the light that they can garner at this point to understand. Then the righteous, the foolish virgins are fooled. I love that play on words. The foolish virgins get fooled, right? And they don't realize, hey, this really is the Lord coming. And then they go and they enter the bride chamber with the bridegroom. And so this is my guess. At that point, those 5 wise virgins are endowed with power. And they are the 5 talents who are connected to the wise and faithful servant of the parable of the talents. And what do? They go forth to all the world and they preach the gospel. These are endowed servants. And they gain 5 more talents. And there's another servant that's not accounted for, right? Because there's two good servants, right? One is given 5 and one is given 2. I don't know who the servant is who's given 2. Perhaps it's another group that we're not aware of. And that person is given 2 talents and he gains 2 more. By the way, 5 plus 5 and 2 is 14, which is very similar to the 144,000. And you've got the 15th talent that's given to the evil servant. And maybe it's tarnished somehow, so you don't quite get 15. But so effectively the story is that the Lord works with his own people first, takes them out on an exodus, proves them. Half are wise, half are foolish. The wise ones are endowed with power. They preach the gospel to the whole world. That's what the parable of the talents is all about. And then the Lord comes. So that's the explanation of Matthew 24:25. There's a great deal more in the book. One of the things to point out about the book, and I probably should have pointed this out earlier, is it reflects my own religious tradition, right? I'm a Latter-day Saint. And so I refer to Latter-day Saint scriptures along with the Bible, and that may bother some people, but they connect beautifully. I hope you've enjoyed this little session. It's been fun for me. I know what else I was going to say. One of the things that I go through in the book is I go through the parables of Matthew 13. There's a bunch of kingdom parables in there as well. And what's interesting is that once you fit them together and see the connections, and they're same thing, it's like a spider web, and there's all these connections that you have to put together. And once you put them together, you get a story that's very similar to the story that I've just told you. I thank you. I hope you like it. Love to see your comments. Adios.